start, so if you want to find a seat. On behalf of the Butler County Historical Society, I welcome you all to the final presentation of 2025. Thanks to everyone who came out on this cold, icy night. Tonight's program is Trains, Tractors, and Trucks. The presenter is Ron Mimick, who has been a teacher, coach, and athletic director at Aquinas High School for 36 years. Many of you know him as a coach of several very successful football and track teams, and he has, as a coach, been inducted into the Nebraska Sports Hall of Fame. However, he is a very excellent history teacher. American history is his main topic, and he is a dedicated Nebraska history buff. I've always been amazed that I can give him any small town in Nebraska, and he can give me a whole bunch of facts, interesting facts about that town, including many times the high school sports mascot. Even if the town hasn't had a high school for many years. So he loves Nebraska. He's originally from Columbus, and he came over to Aquinas. He's a SCOTUS graduate, so that was an interesting hire, right, Ron? His favorite part of Nebraska to visit is the Sand Hills. He's done a lot of work on this program, and I know he's worked hard on it with all the other duties he has, and we really appreciate your work, Ron. Tonight, I'm sure that you'll enjoy his program on trains, tractors, and trucks, and I'll give you a hint, it's not just about those three things. Please help me welcome Ron Mimick.
Thanks, Carm. I appreciate the introduction. I first want to start off by thanking Carm and her brother Greg Fiala with a lot of information, James Reisdorf with a lot of train information, Gina Barlene prompted me along and helped me out along the way, the Historical Society, and a lot of the previous research done by society members who have put the books out about the schools and the towns, etc. I drew a lot of information from them, a lot of their Huska room and stuff there. And have kind of a crew here scattered out. You see 60, 70 people, and I don't want to appear to be too relaxed or anything because I've spoken a lot through the years, especially as a teacher. And spoken 25, 30 times as a football coach. And I was over in Des Moines, Iowa about 6, 7 years ago, had a speech in the evening on a Friday night and a speech in the morning at a casino event center. And on Friday night, I walked through a casino, never been through a casino before, it's kind of interesting. And had about 75, 80 guys, football coaches sitting there listening to me. Okay, took a few notes, I've been there too a lot. The next morning I had a 9 o'clock presentation on a Saturday morning, and I could count 9 people in the audience. I don't think they were celebrating their winnings from the casino the night before, but I think they probably imbibed of a lot of the nightlife in Des Moines that evening. So the trains, tractors, and trucks, as Carm said, is kind of a vehicle to explore Butler County in the last 100 years. I used 3 different jumping off points for the information: 1920, 1970, and 2020. Now the stats and the information isn't exactly maybe of exact 1920, but it might be 1918 or 1923. And the 1970 information, some of it like is 1963 from Bruno, from a book I found on Bruno in that time. And a lot of it is kind of from a historical standpoint, is to be a little bit of compare and contrast you know, this is how it was, and this, and if 40 to 50 years later, this is how it was. Then if 40 to 50 years later, this is how it is. And we talk about the growth of the county, which was a lot of the trains, and then the other two vehicles were tractors and trucks and farm implements and stuff, how they changed the county through the years. And don't really have any answers, you know. I'll bring things up as we go and you look at towns, how they change and stuff through that. So it's about comparisons and sometimes imprecise conclusions that I come to. Hopefully it's about 90% plus correct in my information that I've had. And we'll go from there. First, we have the rural population of Butler County. Butler County in 1920 had a population of about 14,500, 14,606. By 1970, it had dropped to 9,400, and by 2020, 8,400 basically. So it had dropped statistically quite a bit. I guess I didn't quite do the percentage there, but it not quite half, but 60%. I know I just checked today, Butler County from 1900 to 1990 dropped 42% from the population. Some counties, one county across the state was 78%, some were 72%. Some of the little counties in the middle of the San Jose actually gained a little bit of population from 1900 to 1990. And if you look there, has the town population 1920 at 38%. That includes all the little communities that reported a population, and the rural population is 62% outside of the communities. Then you go 1970, it was changing, 48 to 52, and now it's 59% in towns and 41 live outside of the towns, and we're talking about also that includes the two lakes area south of Columbus that probably, I would say, have a fairly high population, maybe 600, 700, 800 people. So as you can drive around the county, of course, you notice there's an old farmstead here, there's an old farmstead there. Used to be 2 or 3 farmers in every quarter section, etc. And the first part of the county, first part of the history of the county was the railroads drove where the towns were. They drove the economy of the county. They brought the settlers in many times. That is, it's also back there, Jim Dreisdorf brought in some railroad information. It shows you where those solid lines are where the railroads were. Not all of them went through David City. There's a place called Ninberg, which some of you may not know about. The elevator is still there. It was about half a mile from the town. Edholm, the elevators are still there. Millerton has a monument to it out in the country, etc. Foley, I'm not quite sure where Foley was. But in terms of the routes, that were there, the Burlington route, which is still present, red means it is still a present route. It is still a present route. It's Columbus to Bellwood to David City. It went through Garrison, also went through Ulysses, still does go through those two communities. And the passenger travel ended in 1953. And the Burlington route went from Schuyler to Edholm to Ninberg to Craig to Wahoo to Ashland, and the passenger route ended much quicker in 1941. Now, Chicago Northwestern had 2 routes. They had a route here. They had a route here going from Dwight, Bruno to Linwood, and then another one that came from Hastings down here, Surprise, Millerton, David City, Octavia, and Linwood. And Linwood actually had 2 different routes from the Chicago Northwestern that was coming into Linwood, and that shaped the town. So all these, all the railroads that's where the communities were all on the railroads. There was one community, if you go back here, on Ware, Nebraska, which is down here in the south central part, excuse me, screwing up here a little bit. In the south central part of the county here, they basically didn't exist very long, if it was anything there. It had to survive on the railroads. And then the Union Pacific, which is still here, which Nebraska Central runs on, I believe they probably rent the tracks, and however that arrangement is, from David City to Foley, to David City, Rice City to Foley, the David City to Brainerd, and the Loma. Passenger service ended in 1952 on that one. Closed the line to Loma in 1973. And see, a lot of the passenger service was the 40s, a little bit in the 50s, etc. Chicago Northwestern was 1962 was the last special. That's when that was pulled up. Okay, the trains in the 1920s are much different. What you see rolling through the counties now, much different. The trains you see now, we'll have a picture of them in a little bit. Actually, Butler County has a place now. They put new railroad track in the last couple weeks. At the AGP plant, they're taking a short spur, and they're going west to connect with the Nebraska Central going west out of town. So we actually are one of the few counties that have new railroad track laid in this century, let alone this year. And up here we have, of course, this is probably an engine that might not have been in Butler County, that has a large over-the-road engine, caboose, which if you're a little older, you know what that was. This is a stock car. They used to actually put cattle and hogs on the cars and stuff. Out in the sand hills, actually, there was just a lot of places along the railroad lines that was just a siding, and all it had was pens and stuff for cattle, and they shipped cattle. There was no other buildings there except that. This was the very common box car. This box car here I'll talk about a little bit, and then this carried aggregate, usually as gravel, except that it might have brought coal in town. Those were the stuff going out of town, usually box cars and were grain cars and livestock going out of town. So they brought commodities into for the stores, etc., and then they took stuff out. This was a mixed freight in 1920 in Butler County, and mixed freight means you very seldom ever see these anymore. The last one I've seen was on Nebraska Central going west out of Columbus. Well, they'll have more than 2 type cars. You'll have what going through Butler County, you'll have hopper cars, which are carrying grain, or carrying some sort of a soybean byproduct out of AGP, or you'll have a tank car that's pulling, that is coming through Columbus and pulling ethanol and other stuff back from the MCP plant in Columbus. So this has, it's got the railroad, it's got the tender, it's got I'm not sure what car it is, it's a box car of some sort. It's got a tank car there, etc. Grain transport, people see, commonly they see over here to the right, they see your hopper cars. Before that, they shipped grain in box cars. That is a grain door. That is wood. They stack up, and they would take the auger, not the auger, but the chute, and they'd pour it in there. Guys would get in these grain cars, and they'd be in the grain cars. As they fill up, they'd be moving the grain around as best they could. I'm sure they had a scoop shovel with them too. It wasn't, I myself grew up in Columbus, and my father was a carpenter and a farmer, and I caught a little more of the farmer end, and so I know what a scoop shovel was, etc., like most of baling hooks and all that stuff was. And we would grow some small grain on the farm. We'd take the wheat in and sell it, and and then we'd keep some of the oats and barley and stuff for the hogs. And we had one auger on the farm, and his name was Ron. We didn't have any, we didn't have a whole lot, but it was a couple hundred bushel now and then. But on these grain cars, people had to get in here and there we go. People had to get in here, and they actually had to work. And that was a lot harder. Railroads went to these eventually when they were more efficient and more profitable. Most decisions about business about being profitable. This is a to the left here is a 1970s mixed freight. This is not Butler County, but you'll see they have a box car. They've got several tank cars, box car. You could have a flat car. You could have a gondola there too. To the right, this is a Nebraska picture. That is a Nebraska Central, and that is it's all got its grain hoppers back there. Can you hear me if I don't back there?
Sure.
If I don't always hit this, but that's the cars have changed. The trains have changed. We are in Butler County. We have a lot of train traffic, and we're going to see more train traffic. But it definitely has changed. The type of cars have changed. These are the present-day Butler County railroads. The green, of course, is the Burlington Northern, and then you have the Nebraska Central that comes and ends at Brainerd. So, farmers had to use the trains. This is one of the main ways you moved cattle in 1920. You just moved them, you put them on the road and you moved them down the road. You'll still see this once in a while up in the sand hills where they'll move cattle back and forth down the highway. Well, you had to have good highways. This is a 1937 map of Butler County. The yellow is paved. The red were gravel. Highway 81 does not exist there. Highway 81 existed west a mile or so. And down here, this is 15, but you notice here, that is not Highway 92. It was not numbered Highway 92. I think it was, I'm not sure what it is here, but I think it was 30A eventually. The highway became known as 30A. Here was a 1940 map of the county. Highway 81 is now presently out of Columbus where it's at now. Paved, Highway 81 was paved all the way. Highway 30A, which I believe, I've heard it as 38, but I really believe it was 30A because 30 went through Columbus. 30 was a national highway. And I think they just named this Highway 30A. So it was a 1940 map in 3 years, and it changed. They had some gravel. I'm not sure what the county roads had at that time, but there were gravel here, and these were major highways, or relatively major. There was a 1962 map, 20 years later, basically. It was paved. Highway 64 was paved. And you see down here, I think that's supposed to be a 30A, not a 10A. Ulysses is paved, but the Dwight Highway 66 is not paved yet. The spur to Abbey is not paved. The spur to Linwood is not paved. The spur to Surprise is not paved. So by 62, we had pretty good roads in the county. We had moving the livestock to market. Well, here is a common livestock transport in 1970. I don't know, I saw a pickup with stock racks within the last couple of years. My brother has some goats and sheep out there, and he's got metal stock racks he puts on the back of his truck once in a while. We had it like this growing up. My dad homemade them. He was a carpenter too. But we had it out at the end of the tailgate too, and how many times we loaded hogs going to market, and it was really common to take the hogs to market. We had 2 sets of sows twice a year with pig, have little pigs, and we'd take them to market, and they weighed 200 pounds or so, and probably quite a few of you helped your parents sometime load livestock. Anybody who never had that privilege? Okay, I've got a question for you. Were you ever right? When you were loading livestock with anybody, were you ever right? You took the wrong one or went the wrong way with it or it turned back on you? That always gets it. Get that one, that's kind of true. Then here's the present day livestock transport. Chickens. Chickens have replaced hogs, I think, in the way I look at it. People used to raise hogs. It was easy to raise them. 6 months later, you could take from piggy to sell it and you get money. And it was just cash flow. Nowadays, a lot of farmers, I've talked to a few through the years, is they've gotten these chickens, not because they love chickens, but it allows the son to come into the operation, because land is overpriced at $8,000 to $10,000 an acre. So they're able to use 5-10 acres for the chicken barns, and they can bring chickens in, and then they have a cash flow. I don't know how many times they get a check, but they have a cash flow. So I think chickens are somewhat like the hogs were of 100 years ago. And you'll see these in the county. Those are chickens. And this is a pretty common livestock transport you see nowadays, for farmers and stuff. Okay, tractors, trucks, and trains. Well, this is a truck of 1920. There's no motor, but it is the equivalency to what a truck would be. And I'm not sure what this is in Butler County, but they're hauling lumber. That was a lumber delivery somehow. This was grain transport. Again, another truck of 1920. That's how you took your grain to market. I saw a photo, and it wasn't Butler County, but just recently researching this, where a steam tractor had about 6 or 7 of these tagging behind them, pulling into a grain elevator. 1970s grain transport. A straight truck carries 300 bushels or so. about 15 years ago, I was at Stop In having my morning Dr. Pepper. And I looked over, there was about 7 or 8 straight trucks. And I hadn't quite put 2 and 2 together yet. I asked somebody, how many straight trucks? Semis carry 1,000 bushels, straight trucks carry 300 bushels, the reason why. Then about 6, 7 years ago, we had having a morning Dr. Pepper in Northside, I'd stop in, excuse me, and I'd get talking to a guy, and the guy's from North Carolina. He was about my age, maybe a little, about 62 years old or so. He had driven all the way from North Carolina with his wife. They stayed the night before at the Rose Motel, and he bought one of the straight trucks. He was driving all the way back to North Carolina. And the reason was, he says his field's there, and if you ever look on a Google map and you see Nebraska fields, compared to the fields in the south a lot of times, he said, I have a lot of 25 to 30 acre fields that are in trees and hills and stuff, and I can't get a semi in and out. So I got myself a straight truck, and this was the best one he found. He was driving all the way back to North Carolina. So there was still a reason to use them yet. Then this is the 2020 grain transport. And people don't, and I have an interest in farming. I don't farm or anything, but I have an interest in it. I have a son who farms. 1,000 to 1,100 bushel of grain on a grain trailer. Well, if you get 200 bushel an acre, you have 100 acres of corn. 200 bushel means about every acre and a half you're going to take a straight truck out of the field. So you're going to about 60 to 70, 80 times you're going to take a straight truck out of the field. Well, here you take 5 acres at a time. You take 20 times you take a semi truck out of the field. And again, you take it to MCP in Columbus, or take it out here to AGP, etc. And it just makes sense. You know, it's part of the evolution of technology, which has changed the county and changed the county how it looks. First, it was trains that brought how people lived, and they lived around the train tracks, and that's where the communities were. And now farmers have adapted, you know, to this, and you know, some of that also goes into the genetics and stuff of corn, which, you know, 45 years ago when I picked my last load of corn picked, it wasn't very successful, but it sure as heck wasn't 200 bushel. It might have been 200 bushel on 10 acres. Okay, farm equipment has changed dramatically too with that, from horses to what we have present day. Now, my father only ever talked to horses once. Him and one of his older brother, they picked a field of corn back when he just picked it by hand. He never had no illusion of liking horses, and people I've talked to said they were a lot of upkeep. They're a lot of upkeep, and they don't like to start on cold mornings, much like a tractor. We have a threshing crew, rather large. I'll talk about that in a little bit more. Down here you have a drill with a 4-horse team. Again, this is 1920s, could go into the 40s. You know, our farm basically had half a section between Duncan, Monroe, and Silver Creek in the sand hills, kind of sandy out there. And a guy who was, I remember coming, his mom was selling after Dad passed away in 1980, and a guy come out, he was gonna buy some hay that was left over. He says, this is kind of poverty ridge out here, isn't it? You know, it wasn't great, so now it's pivot irrigated and everything, etc. But there was a guy next to us, there was a family of 11 girls and 1 boy. And they used horses yet in the 70s, not in the general field work, but they used them in winter, and they replanted some corn for us once using a horse and a 2-row planter. And the last 4 or 5 years ago, I know that the boy of the family held on to the farm, and he was still raising Belgian horses, and he was selling them to people. He was selling Belgian horses. I don't think he used them anymore, but I remember seeing a guy using horses in the 1970s, and he actually replanted some of our corn in the 1970s, which is 50 years ago, which is a long time ago. But then you have an early, probably a Fordson tractor, steel wheels. Eventually, rubber wheels came about 10 years later, and there was a reason why. And here's the old-fashioned. I've never been around that. I don't want to be. But they say the horses were just trained with a verbal command. They would move forward 5, 6 steps. You then would you throw your corn. There was a husking hook back there on the table that you'd husk it and pour it off. And you'd throw it against the board, and it would bounce into the wagon called a bang board. A little bit like the bank board in basketball. You're trying to bounce off into the thing. but it was, I think it was the bang board, not the bank board. Here's a scene from the 1920s in Butler County. It's kind of an interesting scene. They are loading corn into a old-fashioned corn crib. We had a corn crib on the farm. That's where we put all our corn. We just picked in the ear and we'd grind it. Actually, back there I have a cob fork that I used back in the 1970s when we'd grind corn. And I still use it once in a while in the yard and stuff to pull leaves out from under. So it's probably 70, 80 years old. But this is what a corn crib was. It had slats in that area, so you could pick your corn at any moisture. You could throw it in and it would dry. This is a tractor. This actually, I've seen very few pictures of a tractor like this, but steel wheels. But you can see there's a belt running right here. And the belt then turns, and it turns a little, what do you call those? I forgot.
Tumblebugs.
Yeah, it turns basically the elevator going up. This is dropping the grain, this is gonna be the corn, in the air, into here, and it goes up in here, and it goes into this here. And this belt, I don't see a twist in it, but we had an little irrigation pump in our acreage in Columbus, about 30, 40 acre acreage. And there was a belt on it, and you had to put a twist in the belt in order to keep the belt tight. Otherwise, the belt would loosen up over time and stuff. So I was around it just a little bit. And then again, there's another wagon, couple horse team in front here, pretty full of corn. Looks like a pretty good corn crop. Threshing oats. These two guys look pretty happy up there. You know, people that grew up on the farm or aren't on it anymore or don't have livestock anymore. Every year in the winter it kind of hits me. This last week, and when it was snowing on Saturday, I went out to snow to blow the snow off, and the wind hit me, and I always remember chores were not fun. You had ice to break in the winter, throw it out of the tanks. You had to pitch hay, etc. The gates got frozen to the ground, etc. Any tractor hard to start, and I'm sure they weren't that happy. But they have oats here. I'm pretty sure this is oats because I blew up the picture and took a look at oats. This is the thrashing machine in the background. This guy is probably running the thrasher. This here is the straw coming out. Here they're making a pile of straw. And they're probably bagging. I've seen it where they put the grain into the wagons, but also sometimes they bag the grain immediately there. And that's probably over in this situation here. It's an older truck here that looks like a tank truck. And you'd have to have a tank truck with water, because on the steam engine here, that was the power of the steam engine. You had water and fire. Fire then would produce steam, you'd be compressed, you let it through the valves and the pipes or whatever, and that's what would drive the flywheel, which you then had the power from the there's that belt again, driving the threshing machine. And etc. Okay, this is a neighborhood threshing crew from somewhere in Butler County, 1920s, 17 men there. There are the 8th man in from the left here, has 2 children, a little girl in his hands. It looks like a little girl right here. They got a scoop shovel here. I'm sure they have some 3-time pitchforks here. A 3-time pitchfork was used to pitch bundles a lot more. 5-time pitchfork means moving manure. I knew that. Quite a few people here. It took a lot of people. It took a lot of people to run a threshing crew. And usually farmers did not own threshers themselves. The guy would come around and thresh the grain, and he might go to Joe's one day, maybe go to Ed's for a couple days, go to Mike's then after that the next day. And one of the competitions with this was between the wives, who put out the best spread of food. Now again, just a few stories from my dad. There was a farm west of what was Mimick Dairy, and it must have been in the 1930s when he was born in 17, so it was in the 30s, and they were threshing grain, and they didn't like to thresh at that farm because all she ever made was sandwiches. They weren't getting the chicken or whatever they were getting. So it took quite a few people to do this, and they would go around and go from one farm to the next, to the next, to the next. They would shock the grain in a little a binder. And one reason we have combines, people call them combines, is the combine combined the binder with the thresher. So it cut the grain and separated the grain at one time. You know, we usually had somebody do that, but I remember the first couple of years at our farm, we had two 1954 Massey Harris combines sitting side by side. I think the guy had them before, and Dad just bought them when he bought the farm, and one was for parts. And after a couple of years, we just started having somebody else do it, but they broke down quite often. Here's an interesting farmyard scene. I count 11 buildings in that scene. As you go here, there's the house. Looks like a barn. This here probably an older barn. This is definitely livestock shelter here. These could have been a conglomerate of things. That could have been a granaries back here, could have been chicken houses, could have been a hog house. Flock of geese. It is geese. Geese, I looked it down, they're a lot bigger than ducks. 3 little kids back here, and again, a large crew. They got corn here, and I'm not quite sure what they're doing. It looks like a thresher, but it must be a pile of corn. I haven't been able to figure out. This guy has a ear of corn in his hand, and I don't know, they must have piled it up and fed it in some way from here, because I don't quite understand, remember that. But that's an interesting crew, a lot of manual labor involved. So you go back into that, the small towns, you know, a town like Ulysses, Nebraska. As you go just 2 miles outside of Ulysses, you had 25 to 26 sections of land. Well, if you have 2 to 3 farms on each section, you have 50 families. You have a father, a mother, maybe 3 or 4 children. Well, cars aren't great in 1920. They come to town to shop. And that is, we get into the little town part of this. You can see there was a lot of towns were self-contained. And it took a lot of people to do the manual labor. Farmer training development. In 1920, it was almost 9,000 tractors. Then if we go 10 years later, there was 38,000 tractors. So 1920s people were starting to gear up with tractors. Then eventually, I have another page here too. The first corn picker, that wasn't manned, that wasn't just, was in 1928. Rubber tires. The reason why, again, people start using rubber tires is they're much more efficient. A lot of the advertisements I've seen in cars and trucks and tractors of the 1930s, 40s, and 50s always talked about fuel efficiency. Matter of fact, go back to up here to 1920, you see the University of Nebraska tractor testing station. Nebraska is the only one in the United States. I believe there's only one other one in the world that actually tests tractors. It's because a lot of people came out with tractors in 1920. A lot of different name brands. They said this was the drawbar power, the drawbar power of 60 horses or 40 horses or 30 horses. A lot of farmers were finding out that they weren't true. So the reason Nebraska had, and they still test tractors, is they were testing to see if these tractors could have a claim that if they're a 30 horsepower tractor or a 40 horsepower tractor. In those days, that was pretty good size horsepower. And then of course now they test PTO horsepower, et cetera, et cetera. And Nebraska still has one of the 2 tractor testing stations in the world. I'm not sure, the other one's in Asia, I believe. And let me see here, in 1940, one farmer fed 11 people. That changes on the next slide, we'll see quite a bit more. Hay baler, might not have to put up hay, quite as first combine, again, it was a picker and a thresher. More powerful equipment, 4-wheel equipment. This is one of the more interesting pieces of information I found in my research. In 1946, Petrozelka John Deere in Brainerd sold 36 tractors. Now, I'm sure a few were trade-ins, but sold 36 tractors. And they took 92 horses in on trade-in. 92 horses in on trade-in, which I think is pretty interesting. I probably, in a not a morbid way, but think some of those horses probably didn't make it out to pasture. They found a glue factory or something for them. By 1950, 127,000 tractors, 3 times the tractors in 20 years from 1930 to 1950 was basically 3 times the tractors. Farmers were not using horses anymore. They're starting to farm more, starting to farm a little bigger, etc. And then 1950, the common use of fertilizer, of commercial fertilizer, where kind of leads us a little bit today, where it's basically corn and beans. 1970s tractor power. This is a really common two-row mounted type corn picker. Ooh, there's a four-row planter. And here is a pull type combine that we had just for a few years on the farm, pulled by International Farm Haul Tractor. Continuing with farm machinery. The first commercial pivot was 1954. Nebraska, as most of you know, leads the world in pivot manufacturing and leads the world in terms of irrigated acres. It leads the United States easily. Just pull up a Google map and go across, and you can just see the circles. The only other place comparable a lot, if you go northwest Texas, there's a lot of just pivots there too. But it replaced the tow line. And the tow line was, I remember we looked into it one time, and Dad drove over to a guy's place to look what tow line was. You had at least strips of grass in the fields that your pipe was on, and then you had the risers, the sprinklers on top of risers, you know, fairly high because you had to shoot above the corn. And when you got done, you would drag it across and a little bit diagonal or to another strip of grass. You'd drag it back, and then you'd drag it back, and then you'd drag it back. It was one of the real ones. Then it wasn't very, probably wasn't very realistic. Took a lot of work, etc. You know, etc. By 1954, the numbers of tractors finally overtook the numbers of horses and mules on farms. 6-row equipment, commercial use of weed spray, again, these the way farms are used a lot today. Mower conditioner, average farm in 1974 was 440 acres. Now, one farmer said fed 76 people. The previous one in 1940, one farmer fed 11. And 36 years later, a farmer fed almost 7 times the number of people by the amount of food that he would produce. No-till and low-till started coming in the 80s. The guidance system, self-propelled sprayers, and of course precision ag. You know, if someone been alive in 1920 using horses and coming nowadays and sitting in a tractor, they could open up their, put their Spotify on their headphones and check on their sports scores, etc. While the tractor just drives it down south and down the middle of the field. Would have been, wow, would have been a lot different. And the modern farm, that's a 12-row planter, sprayer, etc. And then there's again a grain cart, etc. And I'm not sure how many horsepower there, but I'm sure it's quite a bit of horsepower on that tractor. No, maybe 100, maybe $1.2, $1.3 million, brand new. Who's that? You know who that is?
He's here somewhere on that.
Is that great?
Yeah.
Fiala?
He's not speaking up.
Oh. What, is that pig driving the grain cart then? Is that pig driving the grain cart? Also, farm structures have changed a lot in that time frame. To the right, you see the corn crib, and you see a pile of cobs there. Farmers used to sell corn, but when they picked it in the ear, they would dry it, and then, much like the threshing machine, a guy would come by with his sheller. And he'd do this farm one day, this farm the next day, this farm the next day, and then you'd have a pile of cobs, and then you take the grain to market, and cobs had a lot of uses. They were used as a fire, start fires. You could sell your cobs to the guy would buy like a penny or two a bushel. And I heard there were other uses that I had never had to use myself. Modern grain storage on a farm now. This is a pretty good size setup. It's got the grain leg and everything there. A pretty good size setup. And again, chicken barns in Butler County. I think Butler County has like 250 chicken barns. My son is looking into them. He lives about 90 miles straight east right off Highway 92. And he's looking into them. Two boys, two graduates of Aquinas, they were going to build. They built, I think, 12. And I says, and again, I don't know much about them, but I just hear enough about them. You're going to put chicken barns up? Oh, wow. Oh, we you be able to handle it? That's a lot, 12 chicken barns. Oh, we can handle it. Then about 2 years later, I said, I was going, God, we had to hire help. You know, that's a lot of barns. I know there's different type of barns, finishing barns, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, grain processing also changed a lot from the 100 years. You have the Abbey roller mills. A lot of towns have their own flour mills. They have their own flour mills, and they sold flours commercially. Nebraska had the last couple, I'm not sure if they're still open. One was down in southeast Nebraska. I had the name on my thing. The other one was out in Imperial, Nebraska. There were still a couple of flour mills yet. And this is a soybean processing plant, much like the one outside of town. The ones I found here in town were not very good. So this gives you the scope of it. If you ever get time, just drive it out there. They have hundreds of railroad cars there at a time. It is really, really huge. It's big. It is big, and there's 3 of them in the United States. And most of the soybean, the dry material goes to China and Japan for food. I'm not sure what the other stuff goes with, how many different products it has, but it's there. Okay, now we get to how these changes in agriculture, et cetera, and travel impacted communities. And in order to have a community, and I don't have any answers to this because we can drive through communities in Butler County that have dried up, and by no one person's fault have they dried up. But for a small community to survive, things they gotta have. One is an elementary grade school. People don't wanna put their kids in a car and drive them 20 miles to school. You need a restaurant of some sort. A lot of bars in present day small towns have become de facto restaurants also. Because they just don't have enough people coming through the doors. Need a gas station repair shop. Need a grocery store. The one in Cody, Nebraska is actually ran by the school. Town's downtown about 40 miles, and the kids working there is part of their business class, and they run the store. And some small towns have had to form cooperatives. The people in town buy into the grocery store to keep it going. Because an older person, say my age, or give me 10 years and I don't move around very good. Hopefully I don't fall down the ice and move around bad, but also you want to go to get some milk and bread, and all of a sudden you got to drive 26 miles to go get milk and bread. You know, so first chance you get, you're going to move to town and move out of that small town that doesn't have a grocery store. So, and also a lumberyard hardware store of some sort. Those are things that help to keep a town together. You know, even David City, we have Family Dollar. You go out there and buy some Tide detergent or something, or something there. You don't go to Columbus to Walmart to find it. You know, because all of a sudden you go to Walmart, then you shop there at the grocery stores, and it just slowly disintegrates a small town. And then I also put a church. A church is kind of a social gathering place. And as I go through the towns, the yellow highlighted towns are the ones who fall in within these 6 things. A church is important because people meet. It's a common place to meet. They also, a lot of them have fundraisers that brings the community together. Just think of the Abbey, Bruno, Prague, duck dinner triangular that they have 3 weekends in a row. You know, the parishes have to pull together. It doesn't have to be a Catholic parish, but they're out there, they're keeping the church going. And these social gathering places, the quick stops are kind of, the one in Prague's pretty good. It's kind of a grocery store, a restaurant, and it's also a social stop. Because being social is important. Schools, we talked about the one-room schools. 1901, there was 94 one-room schools. Carfield did a lot of this research. 5,000 students in 1920. All the schools are closed. It was 2006 where the state mandated that I'm not sure they're called level 1 schools had to close. Butler County had 2. Had Garfield School and had Abbey School were the last 2 schools that were not affiliated with a K-12 school district. All schools now have to be affiliated with a K-12 school district. Cherry County had 22, and Cherry County is rather large in 2006. Now go to the individual towns. Abbey, the peak population was 1910, a population of 65%.
The biggest decline in Abbey was 1960 to 70. There was the beautiful Abbey Church in the old DeSoto Hall, which definitely was a center of social life in a lot of ways. Older people, a little bit older than me, dances left and right. We lost a kind of a landmark in Butler County recently with the Appleton Dance Hall burning. I even went to a dance there 50 years ago, a wedding dance for somebody. Now in Abbey in 1920, pretty active little town. Again, the yellow highlighted fall within the restaurants, within the grocery store, etc., school. Then I put in red, I put other social places. A saloon. In 1920, there was prohibition. And I'm not sure how these survived, but I'm sure the bars got along somehow. Fire department, I think, is a nice social thing for towns. The Soco Hall, the post office, and it still had a railroad depot. 1970, I found this in 1976 publication, it had a grain elevator, had a rolling place. I'm not quite sure what that was. I'm thinking it was maybe a bar, a little mobile service, but they'd lost a fair amount of things already by 1970. In 2020, you have Abby's Place, which is, I should highlight that is a restaurant, pretty active. And some of these are just home-based. These are not, they are not a brick and mortar anymore. A lot of the present-day businesses are run out of the homes, or just part of the business, and they're close to the town. They're not in the town. Cravonic Construction is in the town. Go to Bellwood. Preacher Frontier Co-op and one of their Bronco basketball teams. Bellwood is kind of unique, is that they're close enough to Columbus, they're a bedroom community, and their population has actually grown. The biggest decline was 40 to 50, but the population grew in that 10-year time frame. And from 1920, it was 369. Now it's 407. Its location is close to Columbus, which in some ways is good. But then again, if you're a bedroom community, and towns by Omaha and Lincoln find this out, that not many of them can support businesses because the people will just shop in a big town. And if they get up in the morning, drive to the large town, work, drive home at night, and just go home, they don't know people in the small towns. So a lot of times the people in the small towns, when it's a bedroom community, do not know each other real well. They do not know each other real well. 1920 Bellwood, it was pretty hopping. I put down 3 Catholic churches. There are 3 Catholic churches in the valley. Grocery stores. There's a newspaper, hardware store, meat market, another hardware store, another grocery store. Again, probably most of the people who lived in Bellwood, again, this is an assumption, most of the people who lived in Bellwood at this time, probably, majority of them probably owned a business or worked at one of these businesses. So you could live in Bellwood in 1920 and not have to leave town very often. And again, you have the fire department, the post office, and a pool hall. And for some reason, I'm thinking Bellwood might have had a bar around 1920. 1970 on the left, there still was a co-op lumber, Deere grocery, a grocery store, Methodist church. There might have been a little more of this, but this one I was able to find in my research. And again, you had a bar, the fire department, post office are all again social areas. In 2020, you have Frommy's Place, Meistermart. I got some red there because it's kind of a gas station, but also a little bit of a grocery store for some odds and ends. You have the Methodist Church, Romsher, Pioneer Seed, but I know Wellman Body and Paint is in the country. H&H, I'm not sure where that's at. Frontier Co-op is a big one. Voss Plumbing doesn't have a brick and mortar, and Barcelona Logging is outside of town. Most of the stuff in 1920 and 1970 were in town yet. Go to Brainerd. Has dropped some in population. Biggest decrease was 1950 to 60. Brainerd business. Brainerd, along with Ulysses, really seem to have a lot of businesses. A lot of businesses. School, Cabela, hardware and furniture. Where we heard that name before. They were the forerunners to the Cabela sporting goods stores. It was a Catholic grade school and a public grade school. Salon, IGA store, another grocery store and hardware store, a blacksmith. The reason I got blacksmith there, a blacksmith in 1920 is like a mechanic in 2020. They fix stuff. School, fire department, Chrysler Plymouth dealer, newspaper, another blacksmith, another grocery store. Again, that Pitlick Pool Hall, you know, those were just nice places to go and play pool. They usually had a liquor license with them too. 1970 in Brainerd to the left, still pretty busy. You had a cafe, you had a grocery stores, a Catholic church, hardware store, Hilltop Cafe, Stana Grocery. I'm sure you had I don't have a gas station here, but I couldn't find it. They had instead of flour, place that made flour yet. 2020, fire department, bank yet, Husker Bar, post office, I'm not sure the names of all of them. Ron Senior Plumbing, still relatively, they have they still got a school there. A school is always important. Bruno. I remember talking to Jack Vandenberg within the last year or so when he got married in 1967. He told me of all the businesses that were still in Bruno when he got married in 1967. And Bruno had a high population of 2,245 in 1920. But the biggest decrease was 1940 to 50, and in most of the towns of Butler County, that was the biggest decrease was that year. I'm going to assume some of that had to do with the farms starting to become mechanized. Maybe not enough farm ground for father and three sons to farm. One or two would go off. Again, one or two might have got tired of all that threshing and stuff too. And and I think possibly some young men come back from the war and they saw the world in a wider sense. Said, I want to live in Omaha. I want to live in Lincoln. I don't want to be stuck on a farm milking cows in Bruno, Nebraska, or wherever it was. So some of the guys just, I want to move somewhere else. But that 1940 to 50 seems to be where the most towns dropped the most. Bruno businesses, I do have saloon with the name Prohibition. Prohibition, you don't know what that was, in 1919. An amendment to the United States Constitution. I don't know how they got 32 states, is it 3/4? 32 states plus voted for prohibition, or it might have went through the Congress, that you could not make and sell alcohol. That didn't go over real well. By 1933, they had overthrown it. It led to the bootleggers, and it led to a lot of people being illegal just because they wanted to have a beer on the weekend. But Bruno Commercial Hall and Club, which I think I'm not quite sure what all that was. Fiala General Store, Rachi General Store, blacksmith again, post office, and a railroad depot. 1963 to 70. I don't know where I found a lot of information was 63. Still a pretty active community. Grocery store, school, mechanic, hardware store, grocery store, locker, church, mobile, creamery. Most towns had a creamery. I remember, I milked cows, 1 or 2 cows, till about my senior year, and my brother did before me, etc. And the cream and egg guy would come around about once a week, pick up eggs and cream. And several times we had a lot of chickens. It was a really good day in the summer. We had over 100 eggs several times. So we had a lot of chickens, and usually the mothers, the wives, got to keep the cream and egg money. That was theirs, from what I understand mostly. But it was common, and you don't have that anymore. But then you had 2020, Bruno has a Catholic church. The fire department is consolidated with Abbey recently, called the Bone Creek Department. Frontier Co-op and post office. Bruno is a classic example, is just losing that and losing stuff and losing stuff. Is that me? But still, it's still there, okay. David City. We have the downtown, then we have the municipal auditorium. 2020, 22, 16, 2020, almost 3,000. The biggest increase was 2000, 2010. David City businesses, 1920. You see a lot of doctors had individual offices. They had their own offices that they saw people in. Lumber and coal. Coal was big. Coal was something they brought into the town. Usually where coal, there was usually somebody who sold coal. It was the electricity of its day. It warmed the houses. It fired up the stoves. People use coal in their everyday life. Somehow we use electricity nowadays. Bakeries, a post office, hardware stores, etc. McDonald's restaurant. I don't think it's kind of like the McDonald's today, but it was there. Perkins Cafe, which I've heard about that 3 or 4 times through the years from people. 1970, a larger list. I think I might have found just 4, but you get a lot of doctors down here. Deep Rock Gas Station, Country Market, produce, is all those there. Are there a lot of insurance? You know, pretty good. I'm pretty sure that 1970, the most every storefront in David City was rolling. I'm not sure what the night was that the store stayed open in David City. Columbus, it originally did Saturday night, but it was moved to Thursday night eventually. Stores would stay open later and people would go shopping, etc. Okay. Here are some of the examples of trains coming through David City, backing up a little trains. This is Union Pacific coming east, coming west through town. You have a elevator that used to be on the north side of the tracks with Karina Chow's. There's the David City, the present day Historical Society, where you have a Burlington route coming south through town. You stop there. Here is a Union Pacific time schedule. I'm not quite sure this is, I got this from James Reisdorf. As the Union Pacific comes through, it goes to Loma, goes to Brainerd, stops at Yankees, not where it is presently. It was a little farther to the southeast. David City, stop at Foley, stop at Riot City, before they got out of the county. So those stops would have been, you know, possibly passenger travel and some freight travel. Towards the end of passenger travel, this is not in David City. I did have one picture, but this was a better picture. A motor car was one long car, usually, sometimes it was shorter. They'd have a motor, have an engineer, conductor, and then they would have a small freight area, and then they would have seats for maybe 20 people. And that was one way to economize a little bit, keep them going. They're also called, sometimes they're called doodle bugs, but this was, David City was served by motor cars in the 1950s. And we go fast forward to David City of 2020. Still got quite a bit going on in town. We have, of course, we have schools, we have places to fix your cars, etc. We have 2 grocery stores that are pretty active, etc. Churches, restaurants, etc. Subway. Still a pretty self-contained town. Going to Dwight. Somewhat famously, this is I think Novacek Brothers. I think that's been fixed up here. A real nice social place in Dwight is the Legion Club. Population peak was in 1930, 323. The biggest decrease again was from 1940 to 1950. In 1920, there were 3 bars. I found names of 3 bars around that time frame. I don't know if they were all closed during Prohibition. I'm sure some guys wanted to find a Zima Pivo somewhere in Dwight. They could probably find one. For non-Czech people, who I'm not either, that's cold beer. Catholic church and school. There was a public school. There was a doctor in town. I didn't find a lot, but I'm sure there were more than this in Dwight, Nebraska, in 1920. 1970, because I found this was 1962 information I found in Dwight. Grocery stores, a mobile tire place, garage, etc. And down here, somebody was still shelling corn yet. 2020, I've lost a few of the places. You know, again, I'm not from Dwight or Brainerd, but I always thought they could maybe support a grocery store of some sort there, but grocery store is a very, very low profit margin. And if you're already working in Lincoln or something, you just buy your groceries there. 9020 Sci Cafe is still there. Catholic Church grade school service. Okay, Ed Home. I only have 1920. This is an actual picture of a train coming through at home with the 2 elevators. I'm not sure if these are 2 elevators are still there. There was a Christian church, an elevator, and a store. A general store would have had about everything. Would even had some dry goods, and a dry goods store means they didn't have refrigerators or a meat counter. But you could go and you could buy a can of beans and buy some flour, et cetera, et cetera. So that was at home, Nebraska. Garrison. Garrison Gorillas. Here's our main street nowadays. Large, a lot of storage in Garrison. Their biggest decrease was 30% in 1940 to 1950. 1920s, pretty hopping little place. You had a lot of, the railroad depot, train stopped there. You had East Pool Hall Barbershop. I wonder, do they have it West Pool Hall maybe? I don't know why you'd call it East, but another tavern, store, garage, had newspaper. Gina Barlene told me at one time, there were 29 newspapers that have existed in the county. Every little town had their newspapers. The high school closed in 1948. The grade school was still going. 1970, Garrison lost most everything they had. Now going over to 2020, the little water bar and grill still going. Again, most of these do not have storefronts. I'm not sure, but Frontier Co-op is there. So Garrison suffered the fate of a lot of places. Probably was a little too close to David City too. You can come to David City and shop. Instead of going to Garrison, you're 2 miles of Garrison or 2 miles of David City. Well, there's more in David City. So sometimes the selection of a larger town had something to do with that too, I would think. Linwood, another town that had a lot going for it. This is the pretty famous Nowhere Special Bar and Grill that's there. Picture of the railroad depot in there. Again, that was a Chicago Northwestern, had 2 lines coming into town. High peak was 329 in 1910. Again, biggest decrease was 1940 to 50. Linwood businesses, I think there was probably more than this. Again, this is what I was able to find. In 1960 to 70, there were still quite a few businesses, but I heard the 1963 flood, which is famous in Butler County history. I'm not sure how tall it was, but it just rolled through Skull Creek, I believe it was, and down through Linwood, and really did a lot to the town. And it's hard to recover, if you're kind of hanging on anyway. In 2020, there is Nowhere Special Bar, a little post office yet, and fire department. This was a farm near Linwood in the 1920s. It was a soda farm. This looks like the father, the mother, 3 children. This lady would have been probably the mother of either the father or mother. It was really common for the parents to live with their children as they got older. It was really common. And this is probably a hired man over here. Looks to be 2 pretty good sized barns here. That's probably a granary. That's a barn, and they have a horse over here. So it was a pretty common scene. Linwood, a couple more pictures of Linwood. This is pre-car and stuff at the lumberyard. This is a real famous picture of a train is going out and a train is coming in to Linwood along their junction there in Linwood. Loma, don't have any pictures of Loma. Sorry. But in 1920, it had a Bartek lumber. I know Dolly Stera was a Bartek that grew up east of Loma. So it's a common name in that area. Catholic Church Stockyards, Loma Bank, it still said bar. Elevator, a couple of garages, railroad depot, the school, high school closed in 1942. Go to 1970, Loma had lost a lot of it. Again, they were on a gravel road, not really going somewhere. Like right now, the RC stop in Rising City, you drive through Rising City, you might stop there, because it's there. They had a Catholic church in 1970, the Loma Bar, the elevator, and the school that closed in 1970. Millerton and Nimberg. Excuse me, I should have Nimberg, and I've got to take that off. This was Millerton in 1920. This is Pillar's Farm and Service, was in Garrison at this time. It was pretty large here. It was a large brick building, had a barber shop, a creamery, and a grocery store, and a hardware store, and an opera hall. in a large building that kind of, from what I understand, was a part of one big block there. And it was pillars, and when they closed, they moved to Garrison. Fire department, the Millerton Bar, post office, 1934, when the post office closed, and the town didn't survive much longer beyond that. You know, it probably was 1942, and then they pulled up the railroad rails, so it's one reason. There's a granite plaque there of it. There was a Lutheran church there, I think very close to where Millerton was. And then the railroad depot. Nynberg. They had a blacksmith in 1920, a grain elevator, grocery store. This is a picture of the Nynberg elevator that is still there. That is still there. I remember Jerome Rowe, who was from Abbey. He had taught, his father was the last. His father was running the elevator in 1942 when they pulled up the railroad tracks. I mean, we talked about that one time. And then there was a school. It didn't survive real long. I heard a story just the other day from Gina, I think it was Gina told me, is that a certain guy wanted this town here, but the railroad built the town not where he wanted. His story was that they moved the town about a half mile up the road because he was not easy to work with, and etc. Octavia. A top population was 2,000. Biggest decrease was again 1940 to 50. They are now on the David City post office, but they do get mail delivered to one general spot there. This is the school. This is where I think the Augustines live, who are restorers of buildings. 1920, the community church, fire department, grocery store. Depot High School closed in 1946. 1970 still had a little bit going for them. They had a grocery store yet. And the school was going. And eventually, 2020, the Augustine contractors, I think they're the ones that owned the school. They're the ones that redid the inside of the Abbey Church. The radio service has been there a long time, community church. And the Varela Used Cars is big on the corner there yet. Rising City. Its biggest population was 1,900, not 500. Its population is still 356. Picture of the old school, and a picture of Chicago, Nebraska Central coming through town. 1920, quite a bit going for it here. Grocery stores, had a Methodist church, had Faith Lutheran Church, had a St. John's and Zion Lutheran Church, had grocery stores, barber shop, etc. Garage and oil, quite a bit there, self-contained. 1970, still quite a bit there yet. There was a grocery store. I'm sure there was a grocery store, because there was a grocery store in 1990 when I moved yet to this area. In 2020, churches there are still co-op. There's a bank in the strip mall on the highway that was built in the 1960s. The library is in the highway mall there. Hideout Bar and Grill, it's got a different name. I was just there a couple weeks ago. Methodist Church, the Pit Stop, which is really a nice little place. And the school will close in 2012. They're unique enough that they're on a highway. They're close enough to Columbus, so so you can still buy a nice house in Rising City with little kids, and they don't have to go too far to school. Surprise. Doling Oil from the 1980s. I didn't find many pictures of Dwight. This is just a evening picture of it. It's going to be a sky picture. Highest population was 1910. Again, the biggest decrease was 47% in the 1940 to 50 range. 1920, they had a grocery store, a blacksmith, one church closed right then, but another church, the school. So they were, had a fair amount going there. 1977, Dolan Oil, Methodist Church was still going, the grocery store was still going. The school hung on for another 30 years yet, in terms of a grade school. Now they have the Eagle's Nest, Blue River Repair, large dairy outside, and then Rasmussen Seeds is what I've been able to find. Ulysses. Ulysses is a classic example of a town that really had it going at one time. There was a lot going on in Ulysses. This is a picture of the street scene with a couple elevators about 1910, 1920. There's an older car there. Plus there's a horse here. This is the former Methodist church. It's closed. It was open for quite a few years until recently, and just not enough people there to keep, not enough people in the congregation to keep it going. Linwood used to have a Catholic church, is no longer there, so It does happen, there's just not enough people, and a lot of times the pride of a small town is in their, fire department. The largest population was 563, the biggest decrease was 2010, I don't know why that is. But 1908, I found a lot of my friends from 1908, 3 doctors in town, pool hall, grocery stores, several churches, hardware stores, another blacksmith, another meat market, auto repair, a newspaper, Siemens Grocery, shoe store. You know, like I was doing the math earlier with somebody, you know, within 2 miles of Ulysses, you'd have over 25 sections. You know, in those 25 sections, you have 100 quarter section, you might have 60, 70 families there, just 2 miles into Ulysses. Again, a lot of the people who lived in Ulysses probably had a business. Again, that's an assumption I take on just the information available, because what was the population in 1920? 460, well, quite a few of them were in the businesses in town there, maybe even just a teacher in town. Okay, 1970, Ulysses still had a lot going for it. Grocery store, lumber yard. When I moved in 1990, there was a grocery store, a lumber yard, and there were 2 restaurant bars in Ulysses at the time. 1920, a lot of these businesses, again, do not have a brick and mortar presence. They, the vets are there. Dr. Schwang bought the vet place. Wish Irrigation is in the old school. Schmidt's Equipment deals in used farm equipment. They were, a lot of those people are, VLSC. Interesting. That's it. You know, I really, what drove the population early was the trains. What affected the population in positive and negative ways was the larger farm equipment, the ability to travel, the better highways, the better cars. And for good or bad, you know, thought just came to me recently in the last couple of weeks thinking about this, is when somebody was in David City in 1950, and they would have it, they go downtown, and they might stop at 6 different stores that day. And they'd say hi to 6 different people in those stores, and they would know those people. And you'd be shopping in town, you might see another 15 people you greet and talk to. Well, you knew the people in town, but as you lose your stores, more and more people are just, they live in town, they got a house, they drive to Columbus or drive to Lincoln. The more the stuff you keep going in any kind of a small town, the more businesses, the more schools, etc. It keeps people in town, it keeps the town alive. But and if you go through, and I do look at a lot of history stuff over the years, thousands of counties have this very same thing, is they've lost population through the years. And we're pretty lucky that we're in what they call the J of Nebraska, which runs along the Platte River, goes to Fremont, Columbus, Omaha, and then down to Lincoln, kind of a fish hook J. And that's where most of the population is growing. Just athletically, most of the Class B schools now are outside of Omaha. When Cook's got smaller, etc. Beatrice used to be a big Class A school, but Beatrice hasn't grown because of its location. It's not on a major interstate highway. So, you know, David City's really relatively prosperous. You know, it's a battle out there. I've heard that there's small towns that give away lots. They'll give away lots and plumbing and stuff up to your house if you build within a year. You know, the people are trying to get people to live in small towns, and some people do return because it's a nice place to raise kids instead of in the hustle and bustle of Lincoln, Omaha, but they still have to be relatively close to a large community. I don't have anything else, that's it. Any questions? Yes. Yes.
Back in the mid-60s, a lot of the farmers shelled their corn, and a fond memory for me was all the farmers around Bellwood would get a Mr. Johansson out of Octavia in his sheller, and he'd come around and shell the farmer's corn for him. And another one was the coal trains would come through Bellwood, and they had 2 kinds of coal. They had chunk coal, and then they had stoker coal. They get us young kids to, when they're shovel the coal out for the stokers and for the chunk coal.
Yes.
Over there in Denver, north and west of the elevator, there used to be a brick factory in there.
Oh, really? I know there's a little A couple of head,
West side is
oh,
called.
okay, west side. I know you go from the elevator just a little bit north on the east side of the road, the Abbey Road going north. There's a cemetery there with a couple of headstones. You have to kind of look for it. I've been up in there one time trying to find that. A brick factory. Well, that's interesting.
You can see in the hill where they dug out, so that they used to farm down there, so you're already picking up bricks that
They used the clay. Yes.
One reason you noted that the Chicago Northwestern pulled up at 41 and 42 is because they used the rails for the munition site in Hastings.
Okay.
That's why they pulled that.
Yeah. There was coming back from the war, there was a lot of inflation, and one reason there was is cars. There wasn't hardly any cars around because the cars, if they were old, they were junk for the war, for the metal of the war and stuff. So one of the reasons there was inflation was there wasn't a lot of cars around. Again, there were no new cars built in 42 through 45. Thank you.
Stay up and be my assistant.
Yeah.
I think Ron did a fantastic job. We appreciate everything he's done. So we're gonna draw for the prizes that we have. So if you stuck around and you have a ticket, now's the time to get it out. And we have a winner of 334460.
What's the number again?
334460. Okay, you win a book. And now I'll draw another one.
Okay.
Okay. And we have 334500. Okay. And he gets a tote bag. Okay, thank you, Ron. Okay, well, I had a whole bunch to say, but I don't have to say nearly as much of it, and I'm gonna tell you why. But first I wanna say how thankful we are for all of you for coming out. We have a really small crowd tonight, but you guys are awesome. Those of you who came out, thank you. That's wonderful. We're really grateful to our sponsors. Tonight's program was funded by Humanities Nebraska and the Butler County Area Foundation Fund, and there's a little display they have back there about the fundraising they're doing, so go ahead and take a look at that. And I know we have at least one representative here tonight who you can visit with if you'd like to contribute to the Butler County Area Foundation Fund. And we really want to thank the family of Eugene and Darlene Divish because they are our local sponsors. That's a big deal for a family to give money to events like this. So, and of course, we're really thankful to all of our volunteers and to Jackie Mashek for cooking kolaches all day, and for Carm because she is who handled Ron. She was his handler. So, well, I think you were pretty easy to handle though. So I wanted to tell you that so far the BCHS has put on a total of 23 programs since 2022. That's a lot. We owe a major debt of gratitude to each person who presented a program, and Ron is now one of many who have researched history, found photos and memorabilia, created PowerPoint programs, wrote the program, and practiced, and then got up here in front of, some of our crowds were more than 200 people to give that program. Over these years, 30-some people spoke about Butler County history, and out of that handful of people, only a handful of people were actually accustomed to public speaking or speech writing. So that's kind of a big deal. Local talent, I believe, was our secret sauce, and we believe it's why we've enjoyed the guests who have attended these programs, because local people support local people. A few of our presenters even stepped up more than once to do programs, and we give special thanks to Carolyn Dwork, Diane Duran, Greg Fiala, Mark Doling, and Jim Reisdorf. And of course, we must remember the Darrow sisters who sang for so many programs in 23 and 24. And this is where I was going to tell you that although we'd love to produce some more programs, we don't have any presenters, but we have 2 presenters for next year. So we're very excited about that. Jean Brown stepped up and said she would do a program about the history of Aquinas High School. And Joel Turney tells me that the entire fire department of Butler County, like the board, is that what it is?
County Mutual Aid.
Say again?
Butler County Mutual Aid.
Have all agreed to do a program about the history of fire departments. So, a county-wide effort. That's really cool. So I'm relieved and very happy. So we're really looking forward to next year's presentations, and if you know anybody else who would be willing to give a presentation, or you have a suggestion, or you'd like to help us contact that person, just please let us know. So, thank you for coming out and braving the weather. Yes?
Johnny Lonitsky did a presentation from Dwight. I guess he was in Dwight, living in Dwight and fell and broke his arm.
Oh,
So now he's back with his son in
okay. Yeah, I know we have some relatives of John's here, so they probably know about that, but we love John. John did a fantastic job. He was one of our many great presenters, so, yeah. So keep an eye on Facebook, and that's where we'll update you, and it'll probably be on the banner as well. So thanks for coming out, guys, and thanks again to our sponsors.